my name is Brian Benson with James Green Estate Sales, and today I'm here to talk to you about silver. Now, a lot of times we get phone calls from people who will say, I've got all the silver and I need to sell it. And I'll ask them, okay, well, is it sterling or is it silver plate? And there's always a pause on the phone, and they say, well, I don't really know. They assume it's silver because their parents always refer to it as silver, but they don't know whether it's sterling or silver plate. And then, invariably I always start asking questions, trying to figure out, what do you have, that type of thing. And normally general rule of thumb is, on most households, at best case scenario, you might have sterling flatware, you might have little bitty tiny sterling bowls that are about this big, little nut dishes, or you might have some weighted sterling, but usually most other pieces in the house are going to be silver plate, unless, the people are really wealthy. A silver plate tea set, I should say, might have been $100 new. A sterling silver tea set could have been $30,000 new. So usually there's an income level difference when we start talking about whether the people had sterling or silver plate. But for those of you who really aren't sure, if you're curious whether you have silver plate or sterling, I kind of want to explain some of the marks that we look for when we're looking. So for those of you who don't know the difference between sterling and silver plate, well, it's pretty easy. Sterling is going to be 92.5% pure silver, and basically the only reason it's not pure silver is because they need that little bit of alloy to make it strong. And silver plate basically means anything else, which is copper or brass or some other metal, that basically what they do is they make that out of a base metal, and then they put a little tiny thin layer of silver and they plate it on top of it, and it's going to look pretty much just the same as silver or sterling, but it's not going to have any of the cost or the value associated with it. So I kind of want to explain, some of the marks. So obviously the most easy mark to look for, and what I always say, where to look for the marks, sometimes you really have to hunt. Always look on the back side. If it's on forks or utensils, it's going to be the back side of the handle. If it's on a tray or something, usually it's on the back of the tray. Sometimes it'll be on the very edge of the tray. So sometimes it's kind of hard trying to find these marks. Sometimes it's like a Where's Waldo, trying to figure out where they stamped it or didn't stamp it. Sometimes you won't even find a stamp, and sometimes it takes someone who's dealt with a lot of sterling to actually really look at something and say, yeah, this is for sure, this isn't. If you ever are not 100% sure, used to be everybody did the acid test where you take it to somebody and they could put some acid on it and they can decide whether it was sterling or not sterling. So now there's this thing, it's called X-ray Spectrography, and it's really cool. It looks like a big barcode reader from a supermarket, and they can hold it up to the metal and they can X-ray your metal and they can actually tell you whether it's silver or not silver. And it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to do those chemicals and burn your fingers when you're trying to figure out whether it's silver or not. And so anyway, if you do find the marks, these are the marks you always want to look for. Obviously the easiest one's going to be sterling. It's called sterling, and half the time it's going to be marked sterling. Sometimes it actually also might be marked, some abbreviation of it, STER, or they might take the vowels out, STLG, any variation of that. Usually if you see those variations, it's going to be sterling. Other thing to look for is numbers. The most common one is going to be 925 because it has to be 92.5% silver to be called sterling. So that's by and large the most common one. Sometimes you'll see 800, and that means it's going to be 80% silver. It might not be sterling, but it actually still has a silver content, so you want to make sure that you don't throw some of it away because it does have value because of that. Other markings could be 833. I personally never seen a piece marked 833, but that's more common in Northern Europe. There was a marking for a lot of stuff that was made up there. I've also seen 900. Interesting thing about 900, sometimes when I see pieces marked 900, they're sterling, sometimes they're not sterling. So just because it's marked doesn't always mean for sure, but always say if it is marked, it means at least it bears more scrutiny. And then another mark I would say you look for is 950, 1000, or 3 zeros. Usually the 950, the 1000, or the 3 zeros, a lot of times that comes off of Mexican silver. Mexican silver is usually the one that has the highest risk of not being silver. Sometimes down there they'll mark it as silver and it really isn't, so you kind of have to be a little bit careful, which is also why I say, then you always want to have it double checked and x-rayed. Other marks you might want to look for when you're doing this is, those are ones that we commonly find. There's also the British mark. The British mark, instead of marking it and having it say sterling, what they'll do is they'll use hallmarks. And if you look at the back, if you've seen something that has like 3 little bitty circles and there's little bitty characters inside the circles, you always want to look at the very middle one. In the middle one, what you hope to find is going to be a lion. It's called a rampant lion, and it'll be this lion who's standing sideways, just basically kind of doing that. You know, it might be standing up like this, or he might be sitting down and doing it. But that's the British hallmark for sterling, so you always kind of want to look for that one. And finally, after that, and this is one I've never seen, but also look for the word plata, P-L-A-T-A. Now, plata means silver in Spanish, but a lot of times people, when they look at it, they think it means plate, but it doesn't. It actually means plata. Now, personally, I have never seen this on a piece. I have a friend who found this on a piece, and he bought it because the person thought it was silver plate. He knew that it was sterling. He bought it, made a lot of money on it. Now, if you see the word Vasilla de Plata, that is supposed to mean silver plate. I've never seen this term either, but that term could be out there. So you might want to, just be cautious. So now we're going to talk about silver plate. Now, one thing I didn't mention when we were talking about sterling was weighted sterling. And what does weighted sterling mean? Is basically, and normally you find these on candlesticks, and they'll be these little bitty tiny short candlesticks, usually, they'll be really kind of heavy, but it will say weighted sterling. And what that means is it's mostly going to be plaster or some other type of stuff inside there to give it the weight, but there's going to be a really ultra thin sheeting of sterling that's actually encasing all of it. Now that actually can be scrapped. I've actually done it before, and I've cut my fingers up a billion times doing it, but often, a lot of times, there might be an ounce of silver in that, and if you want to take it apart, you can get it off. It's really difficult. You really kind of have to be diehard to do it, but like I said, it can be done. So it does have value, it does have scrappable value if you're someone who's scrapping. And anyway, so now we're going to talk about the stuff I always say to look out for. This is the most common marks for silver plate. First one is going to be obviously anything that's marked plate. And when I say that, I mean if it says silver plate, if it says quadruple plate, if it says triple plate, extra plate, community plate. If plates is somewhere in that word, you're pretty much going to be guaranteed it's going to be plate. Other thing most common to look out for is EPNS, which stands for electroplated nickel silver. Pretty much anytime you see EP anywhere on silver, it's going to mean electroplate. EPNS is obviously the most common one that we run into. So when you see that, it's not going to be silver, it's just silver plate. Other ones to look out for, and I've argued with people this many times before, and I always have to prove it. Nickel silver. When you see nickel silver, German silver, or alpaca, none of those are silver. In fact, nickel silver doesn't even have nickel in it. It's mostly going to be tin and brass, or tin and copper. It's not even mostly nickel. Other ones to look out for, silver soldered. Those are going to be plated. There's many, many, many other ones when we start looking at this. If you see brand names like Community or Community Plate, or if you see brands like Rogers, those companies almost always produce stuff out of silver plate. They didn't really work with sterling. Usually when I go through, I always look for the first common identifier so I can rule it out as being plate. So some other markings that we look for are Sheffield. Sheffield almost always means plate. It usually is a thicker plate. On the older stuff, it's going to be a thicker plate. But if you see it marked Sheffield, it'll usually even say Sheffield plate. Other markings we look for are silver on copper, silver on brass, silver on anything. Usually that's always a good sign that you're not dealing with actual sterling. These are what I say are the most common. There could be a million more. Luckily, in the day of Google, you can always just Google. If you see something you're not familiar with, just Google it. Usually that will tell you, this means silver, this doesn't mean silver. But these are by far the most common that we run into. Hopefully this gives you an idea when you're looking underneath your dining room cabinet or your china cabinet and you find stuff, whether it is. Now, obviously, if it is sterling, it does have value. Sterling, because of silver, it's mostly silver. It's always going to have a value to it. If you've got silver plate, unfortunately, that's a much different story. The market for silver plate is because people don't live formally or dine formally. People aren't really using it anymore. So because of that, that really has crippled the demand for that. There are still, every once in a while you'll find, good makers that make stuff that people still collect, So, don't, just because it is silver plate doesn't mean it's valueless, but, sometimes you have to make sure, sometimes it's really going to depend on what the item is. It's going to be literally item by item. Some items might have value, some items might not. So hopefully this helped you try to identify your sterling or your silver plate that you've got in your house. Hopefully you won't make a mistake and sell something For Silverplate, that was sterling, and hopefully, maybe if you're at a garage sale, you'll find that piece of sterling that someone else thinks is Silverplate. Hey, you might make a couple of bucks. Anyway, if you have any more questions or would like to attend one of our estate sales, hopefully we won't make a mistake on any of our silver, but you feel free to stop by and maybe you will make a good buy. Visit our website at jamesbeanestatesales.com, and remember, we're located in Oklahoma City. Thank you.